let's move forward. Here's where we're gonna. Here's the main, the meat of what we're going to be studying tonight. It's a book by AARON EGGMAN. Brother Eggman gave me permission to use material from this book, although I can't just simply read the whole book onto the internet. But he is letting me use excerpts, and the book is entitled "The Saints Go Up and the Wrath Comes Down." It's available, as you can see on this screen grab here. It's available on Amazon as an ebook for $9.99, a black and white paper book for $9.99, and a color paperback for $41.99. And it's also available on his website in excerpts, which we're going to be reading from. Brother Eggman provides the entire curriculum free of charge, which is basically, from his perspective, a $200 value, but he appreciates people who have benefited from the curriculum by purchasing the book. So just a plug for Brother Eggman. Go out and buy the book. It's worth the read. I can tell you, after reading The Sign by Van Kampen, which is like 500 and something pages, Brother Eggman's book is a lot easier to understand, a little less technical, a little more friendly to your average pew sitter. I don't think that is an insult to Brother Eggman. I think that's a compliment to him in that he's able to take a very difficult topic, such as the rapture and the 7th week of Daniel, and to describe them and teach them in a way that is easy to understand. So I really appreciate the hard work that he put out to create this particular resource. So that's where we're going. So today, here's our topic. The very same day Jesus comes and raptures Christians is the very same day God's wrath begins. This is a blog post that is available on Brother Eggman's website at prewrathresources.com, I believe. The description is in the show notes. In other words, the description of the video. There's a link there to Brother Eggman's website in case I butchered it there. But this particular post was put together almost 10 years ago, June of 2016, and AARON Eggman is the author. Okay, so let's just jump right into this. I put together the slides, but these are Brother Eggman's notes. So from this point forward till the end of this particular study, except for the scriptural references, of course, every word you're reading on the screen is Brother AARON Eggman. It is not Ariel Hanavi. It is Brother AARON Eggman. He gets the credit. All right, here we go. The pre-wrath position on the end times considers the days of Noah and Lot a prototype for Christians in the final generation before Jesus' return. Just as in the days of Noah and Lot, people of the world will be living violent, sinful lifestyles, all the while oblivious that their rebellion will one day be judged. However, before God sent the flood on the earth and the burning sulfur on the city of Sodom, comparable to the day of the Lord, God rescued Noah and his family and Lot and his family from the regions targeted for judgment. As we further study their stories, we will find an underlying principle that informs end-time events. And this is the principle, so listen up. It's the principle of the very same day. So what is that? He elaborates. God both preserves us in and rescues us from trials. This is something that goes all the way back to the Old Testament, this concept. So let's read about it. Eggman says, God preserved Noah through the trials of living as a righteous preacher in the midst of gross depravity, and he rescued him from this time of trial, removing him from the punishment of the wicked during the flood. So you have to catch that. There's a time when, using Noah as one example, that he lived through a time of trial on him. In fact, Peter, when describing Lot, that we're going to read about here next, Peter talks about how that Lot was vexed. His very righteous soul was vexed as day by day he had to endure the wickedness all around him in Sodom and Gomorrah until God finally rescued him out of that place and rained down fire and judgment on it. So Lot is even more to the point, but let's keep going. God preserved Lot, this is Eggman, God preserved Lot in the region of Sodom and Gomorrah, but he saved Lot out from this trial. Remember, the word trial there is really highlighted in Peter's works. But he saved Lot out from this trial, removing him from the area and then pouring out his wrath on the region, destroying those cities. So the central theme that's brought up by Yeshua bringing these two examples into his Olivet Discourse. Remember, this shows up in Matthew chapter 24 with Noah. It also shows up in Mark chapter 13, Luke chapter 17, and Luke chapter 21. And when you take all four of those renderings of the Olivet Discourse and you composite them back into one event, because that's what they really are. They're one event. They're just four different descriptions in the Bible across three synoptic gospels. When we composite them all back together, we find that Yeshua mentions both Noah as well as Lot. And then when we bring in Peter's rendering with Lot, he mentions Noah as well, but he spends a lot more time on Lot for some reason. Then we get this full picture of the idea that in the bigger scheme of things, when it comes to people groups, there are the separation between righteous people and wicked people in God's eyes, right? There's a what do we call it? A bilateral, I don't want to use that, bilateral ecclesiology. There's I'm forgetting the term, but it starts with a B. But there's a binary, that's the word I was looking for. There's a binary quality to people groups. God either sees you as righteous or unrighteous. And in the story with Noah, God makes a separation between the righteous and the unrighteous by taking one to himself, that's the righteous Noah, and leaving the unrighteous behind to suffer the destruction. And likewise with Lot, God takes Lot to himself in righteousness by rescue and salvation, a type of salvation, a type of rapture, and he leaves the wicked in place to suffer the judgment and the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. So let's keep reading this. That's what we're going. And so in this way, like Eggman says, God knows how to rescue the godly and to pour out his judgment on the wicked. When God pours out his wrath, this is Eggman continuing, there will be no innocent casualties, right? You read about the news of Israel attacking Hamas in the current excursion that's going on that started October 7th of last year, where Hamas, without provocation, basically, attacked Israel without warning, without for no reason, just attacked Israel. I mean, of course, they hate Israel. Of course, we know that's the reason, but there doesn't seem to have been any previous excursion on the part of Israel moving into Hamas. With that kind of, in other words, it wasn't a response from Hamas on their part to attack Israel. It was an unprovoked attack, is the point I'm trying to make. So what happened? During that time, Israel went on the counteroffensive, and since then they have been doing so. And they moved into the Gaza Strip and started pushing Hamas back further and further and further. But in the process, unfortunately, there have been many innocent casualties, right? And it pains us to see this. Israel is not perfect in their counteroffensive, but they're doing their best to avoid the innocent casualties, what we call the collateral damage, but it's unavoidable. And so even just now, I think I was reading the news just this week, there's been like upwards of 40 or 50 more casualties as Israel's pushing forward with this offensive to try to wipe out Hamas and to rid that area of the thugs known as Hamas, to basically liberate the Palestinian people from Hamas and set that region free. But there have been innocent casualties, and we mourn that. We mourn for the Palestinians because of those innocents that are being killed because of what's going on. Well, when God pours out his wrath, God is not like Israel of the earth today. He is a perfect God. He's righteous. He's just. There won't be innocent casualties. Everyone who's a casualty is because God is righteous in his judgment. He knows who is deserving of his punishment, and he will destroy only those who are deserving of his wrath. So praise God that he is a righteous God and that he's able to sweep away the wicked, but he's able to rescue the righteous before that happens. Likewise, Eggman says, not a single wicked person will be able to escape God's wrath. God's judgments are righteous and they're also final. Let's keep reading, Brother Eggman. God has established a precedent of always rescuing the righteous before judging the ungodly. Peter caught on to this idea and uses the stories of Noah and Lot to explain that the Lord will first deliver Christians before the day of judgment. So we're going to have a quote here from Peter here in a moment. Let's see what we have. Peter defines this day of judgment as the day of the Lord in 2 Peter 3, 7 through 10. But in 2 Peter 2, 4 through 9, Peter writes that just as God first delivered Noah and Lot before pouring out judgment upon the earth, he will do the same before the day of the Lord. So let's read this quote from 2 Peter 3, 4 through 9. It's a lengthy quote, so just read it with me. Quote, "For if God did not spare," and here's the one that, remember I was talking about Lot, how that he had to kind of endure the tribulation. I'm putting the word tribulation in quotes with my fingers for those of you who can't see me. He had to endure the tribulation of dealing with the unrighteous people there day after day. But look at this quote. This is Peter. "For if God did not spare the angels who sinned, but cast them down to hell and delivered them into chains of darkness to be reserved for judgment, and did not spare the ancient world, but saved Noah, one of 8 people, a preacher of righteousness, bringing in the flood on the world of the ungodly, and turning the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah into ashes, condemning them to destruction, making them an example to those who afterward would live ungodly." Now look at this part. "And delivered righteous Lot, who was oppressed by the filthy conduct of the wicked." And then I like this like he kind of goes off on this little tangent about righteous. "For that righteous man dwelling among them tormented his righteous soul from day to day by seeing and hearing their lawless deeds." Right? He's got righteous Lot, righteous man, righteous soul. And then in verse 9, "Then the Lord knows how to deliver the godly out of temptations and to reserve the unjust under punishment for the day of judgment." End quote. And it's interesting that using these two examples, that remember, Peter got this from the Lord Yeshua himself. Peter was one of the disciples that heard Yeshua's Olivet Discourse that day as they sat on the Mount of Olives and they looked across the Kidron Valley at the temple and they talked about it, right, in all of its beauty and splendor. And Jesus predicted its destruction in 70 AD and another future temple that could possibly be built in our day that will also suffer some form of destruction, although it may not have to be a full-blown temple, could just be a smaller sacrificing structure. But the point being is Peter pulls in the very same two Old Testament examples that Yeshua did, talking about Noah and talking about Lot. And the same purpose is retained, that is, from the bigger picture, when we got this binary groups going on, binary quality of two different peoples, right? Sheep and goats, wheat and tares, righteous and unrighteous, things like that. You know, we find this all throughout the Bible about the binary quality of human beings on the earth today. There's always at least two, right? One and the other. Light and darkness, that's what I mean by the binary qualities. And God knows how to rescue the righteous, but preserve the wicked for judgment. We see that we're going to find this as we keep reading through the Bible. Matthew chapter 13 has a harvest there that has a separation. Matthew chapter 25 has, of course, the famous sheep and goat judgment, which is, again, righteous and unrighteous being separated, for one for eternal life and one for destruction. We've got in the book of Revelation, in chapter 14, we've got two harvests going on there. One is a kind of a harvest with a sickle of what appears to be kind of wheat type of harvest, meaning it's the righteous. And then shortly after that, there's another harvest, a separate one by another angel with another sickle. My study buddy in the chat room and I were talking about this before the show. There's another harvest with another sickle that is definitely a grapes harvest, a cluster of grapes. That is the wicked that's thrown into the winepress of the wrath of God and trampled by his fury, right? In other words, it's the day of the Lord. So we've got this separation, and that's what we're looking at here. But what we're going to talk about today is how is this relevant to when these events take place in relation to one another? In other words, when we're talking about separation, is there a lengthy time period between the two? Let's keep reading Brother Eggman. Peter was expanding upon Jesus' teaching on his coming. Let's read Jesus' account of what life will be like in the days leading up to his return in Luke 17:26 through 30. I think it's important, as I pause and interject, I think it's important that we pay attention to the way that Jesus describes the state of affairs on planet Earth leading up to his parousia. Now, when I say parousia, this is the Greek term that is translated as coming in most passages, right? The coming of the Lord, the sign of the coming that the disciples ask about at the beginning of the Olivet Discourse. So the word coming in the English is often translated from the Greek word parousia, but the word parousia is one single event with multiple events attached to it. So it doesn't just mean one singular event. Even in the first parousia, when Yeshua came to earth the first time, there are many events associated with his first coming, right? His birth in the manger, his upbringing, his ministry, his gathering of the disciples, his disagreements with the religious leaders. Then we've got, of course, the major pieces of his first coming being his trial, his crucifixion, his death, burial, his resurrection, then his ascension. So all of that is the first parousia, and yet we can't just collapse everything together. We would do better service to look at them in their respective separate events and happenings as they bear importance for us as Christians. So we're talking about the same thing, kind of parousia. In the second time when he comes is going to include a rapture event, a resurrection event, not in that order, by the way. It's resurrection, then rapture. But we also have the initiation of the day of the Lord. Then we have the day of the Lord itself. Then we've got the we've got events that include punishment poured out on Antichrist and his wicked beast empire. We've got the destruction of Mystery Babylon. We've got the what do we call it? The bringing of Israel to her knees, the fact that she has to be refined, the refinement of Israel herself, because she's not ready to meet her Messiah when the rapture takes place, by my reckoning. I could be wrong, but I believe so far that's the model I'm going with. But Yeshua himself has to meet with Israel in the desert where she's fled and deal with her face to face so that she can understand exactly who he is. And then they march together back up to Jerusalem. Then Then Yeshua does battle at the Battle of Armageddon or something. Maybe he goes up to heaven, then it comes back down on the horse. There's that horse again, always throwing me off. And with the angels of the armies of heaven, could be the church as well. But my point is, as I'm digressing, there are a lot of events associated with the parousia. But when it comes to the bigger pictures, we look at Luke here. What does Jesus say? Just as it was in the days of Noah, so also it will be in the days of Son of Man. So he's describing the state of affairs prior to one of the events of the parousia known as the Rapture, but not, it appears to be, the event known as the Second Coming or the Battle of Armageddon. Because if you look at the state of affairs on planet Earth, before the Rapture/resurrection event, the world, for the most part, will have already taken the mark of the beast and is enjoying a measure of protection and provision by the Antichrist because he takes care of them as long as they worship him. So yes, there will be some resistance here and there, but for the most part, they seem to be acting like the people did in Noah's day, eating, drinking, marrying, giving in marriage. They don't really have any idea that the day of the Lord is going to pour out judgment on them. So that's why Jesus describes them as kind of in a carefree attitude. By comparison, after the day of the Lord has initiated, and we've got the events of the trumpets that are being poured out, and the bowls judgments that have also started to be poured out. When we finally get to the end of the 70th week and the Battle of Armageddon, somewhere around there, we at least have all kinds of supernatural things that have taken place on Earth. I mean, the list is insanely outrageously terrifying. If I were to just list it for you, just kind of summarize the trumpet judgments alone, not to mention the wrath of the bowl judgments, where they're the final. The trumpet judgments alone are going to practically ruin planet Earth. But we have all of that, and then the Lord shows up, and supposedly they're living carefree. It just doesn't seem to fit. That's one big problem that I have with many of the post-trib models that seem to place the second coming of Jesus at the far end after all this bad stuff has happened, at least after the trumpet. Some pre-trib, post-tribbers place the rapture after the trumpets, but before the bowl judgments, but many of them also place it at the very end, like I showed you in one of those charts. I can't follow that, especially the way that she was going to describe it. So he says, just as it was in the days of Noah, people were eating, drinking, marrying, being given in marriage up to the day that Noah entered the ark. Then the flood came and destroyed them all. Notice he says up to the day in verse 27.